Is it possible to unravel the truth when everyone involved seems to have something to hide? The Farris family estate stretched over 10 quiet acres, a place where horses grazed and sunlight filtered through the trees. But on the morning of July 5, 2018, that peace was shattered. Smoke still lingered in the air, and beneath it, the smoldering remains of Gary Farris, a towering man known to his family as Big Daddy. Who could commit such a brutal act, and why did it happen on a property meant to represent their success and unity? As the investigation unfolded, accusations flew like sparks from a fire, each one revealing layers of deceit, betrayal, and desperation. Was this a crime of opportunity, a long-simmering family conflict, or something no one saw coming? Welcome to True Crime Theatre HQ. For more gripping true crime like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Gary Farris was a man who filled every room he entered, not just because of his towering 6'3" frame or his commanding voice, but because of the sheer force of his presence. As a successful corporate lawyer, Gary built a reputation for cutting through the toughest negotiations, earning both respect and fear in the boardroom. At home, he was Big Daddy, a nickname that captured his larger-than-life personality and his place at the head of the Farris family. But as it often goes, appearances only told half the story. Gary's wife, Melody, had been by his side for over 3 decades. Together, they built a life that seemed straight out of a dream, a sprawling 10-acre property in Cherokee County, Georgia, complete with rolling pastures, a serene pond, and a hobby farm where horses, goats, and chickens roamed. Inside the home, Melody's meticulous touch was everywhere. The polished floors, the carefully arranged decor, and a level of organization she took pride in. But the perfection of their surroundings couldn't mask the growing cracks in their relationship. They shared a home, but lived separate lives. Melody resided in the master suite upstairs, while Gary made the basement his own private domain, a space that doubled as his bedroom, living area, and office. Days could pass without the two crossing paths, a reality that spoke volumes about the state of their marriage. Gary and Melody had 4 children: Christopher, Emily, Scott, and Amanda. By 2010, the older 3 had moved away to start families of their own, leaving Scott, the youngest, living in a loft above the barn. But even with their children grown, family ties were anything but simple. Beneath the surface of this idyllic country estate, tensions simmered. Financial disputes added fuel to the fire. Christopher had been accused of stealing money from his parents, forging checks, and copying credit card numbers. Scott, a veteran who had returned home after serving in Iraq, struggled to find his footing and was often accused of leaning too heavily on his parents' generosity. Texts between Gary and his sons revealed the strain. Words of frustration, betrayal, and a father feeling disrespected by the very children he had provided for. The Farris family's dysfunction didn't stop at finances. Gary and Melody's marriage, strained by years of unresolved conflict, had reached a point of cold detachment. While Melody found solace in an extramarital affair, Gary confided in others that he believed she might be poisoning him. The family's seemingly pristine life was anything but, and the tension brewing beneath their roof was undeniable. It was a life carefully curated on the outside, but filled with accusations, secrets, and fractures on the inside. And then, on July 5, 2018, it all came crashing down. Gary Farris, the larger-than-life patriarch, was found dead in the most unimaginable way, reduced to remains in a burn pile on the property he had once called home. The question now wasn't just who had done it, but why. July 5, 2018 began like any other summer morning on the Farris family's 10-acre property. The horses grazed in the pastures, the pond reflected the morning light, and the air carried the quiet hum of a farm slowly waking up. But by mid-morning, that calm was shattered. Gary Farris, the family patriarch, was nowhere to be found. His youngest daughter, Amanda, was the first to notice something was wrong. It had been 2 days since anyone had seen or spoken to Gary. He hadn't attended a family gathering on July 4, and by now his absence felt less like an oversight and more like a cause for concern. Amanda and her mother, Melody, began to search the property, calling out his name, their voices carrying through the stillness with no reply. Scott, Gary's youngest son, joined the search after hearing their worried voices. Living in a loft above the barn, he often kept to himself, but the urgency in their tone pulled him into the unfolding mystery. It was Scott who noticed something unusual. A burn pile near the edge of the property, still smoldering despite the July heat. It was out of place, unnatural and unsettling. As he approached the pile, a wave of heat hit him, and what he saw froze him in place. Amidst the ash and debris were remains, charred, unrecognizable, but unmistakably human. Scott's breath caught in his throat. He crouched down to get a closer look, but the grim realization was immediate. Teeth, bone. It was his father. In a panic, Scott stood and stepped back, instinctively placing a protective hand on Amanda's shoulder to shield her from the horrifying sight. His voice trembled as he uttered the words that would set the investigation in motion. "This is human. We need to call 900." When emergency responders arrived, the burn pile was still emitting an intense heat. What little remained of Gary Farris told a chilling tale of destruction. But the question loomed large. How did Gary end up here? Was it a terrible accident? Or had someone deliberately done this? As investigators began their work, the Farris family watched from a distance, their emotions a mix of shock, grief, and something unspoken. Suspicion was already in the air. Each family member wore the weight of their own secrets. And as detectives combed through the property, it became clear this was no ordinary death. The burn pile became the starting point for unraveling the truth. Who would do this to Gary Farris? And why? The answers would prove as complex as the family dynamics themselves. And as devastating as the discovery that had shaken their world. The investigation into Gary Farris's death began with the scorched remains found in the burn pile, but it wasn't long before the focus shifted to the house, a place that held the key to unraveling what had happened. As investigators combed through the sprawling Farris estate, small but incriminating pieces of evidence began to surface, each one deepening the mystery. In the basement, which Gary had claimed as his personal space, police found tiny droplets of blood. They were faint, almost invisible to the naked eye, but under forensic analysis, they told a troubling story. The blood spatters suggested that something violent had occurred here, a confrontation perhaps, or worse. Adding to the unease was a single bullet fragment found embedded in the floor, further confirming that Gary's final moments may have played out within the walls of his own home. But the physical evidence didn't stop there. As detectives pieced together the events surrounding Gary's disappearance, they uncovered a suspicious purchase made by Melody Farris on the morning of July 4, just hours after Gary was last seen. Surveillance footage showed her entering a nearby Walmart and buying bleach, cleaning supplies, and other items that, in hindsight, painted a damning picture. To investigators, it looked like an attempt to erase the evidence of a crime. And then there were the messages. In the weeks leading up to Gary's death, his text exchanges with family members revealed a household riddled with tension. Gary had expressed frustration and betrayal, accusing his sons of stealing money and using him for financial gain. One message to Christopher read, "Your stealing has got to stop," while others hinted at a man who felt increasingly isolated and disrespected by the very people he had spent his life providing for. But the spotlight wasn't just on the children. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Melody, whose behavior in the aftermath of Gary's death raised more questions than answers. In addition to her suspicious shopping trip, rumors began to surface about her relationship with a man named Rusty Barton, a lover she had met through her extended family. Rusty was no stranger to the Farris household, and his presence added a layer of complexity to the investigation. Even more shocking were Gary's earlier accusations that Melody had been trying to poison him. He had confided in his children about cookies she had baked that left him violently ill, an incident that had sent him to the hospital. To Gary, it wasn't just a case of bad luck, it was a warning sign. As investigators uncovered these details, the narrative surrounding Gary's death shifted. Was Melody driven by greed, anger, or a desire for freedom from a strained marriage? Or was she simply the easy target in a family where everyone had a motive? The evidence was mounting, but so were the questions. The investigation revealed a tangled web of secrets, betrayals, and hidden agendas. And while the burn pile had been the initial focus, it was the details inside the house and the lives of those who lived there that began to unravel the truth about what had really happened to Gary Farris. As investigators delved into the Farris family's inner workings, it became clear that this was not just a murder investigation. It was an unearthing of long-buried secrets. Each family member seemed to hold a piece of the puzzle, and each piece was as damning as the next. Gary's sons, Scott and Christopher, were among the first to fall under suspicion. Christopher, the eldest, had a history of financial disputes with his father. Text messages revealed years of accusations, forged checks, stolen credit card numbers, and an ongoing betrayal that had left Gary feeling used and disrespected. One message from Gary read, "You treat me like I don't exist," a haunting sentiment for a man who had built his fortune to provide for his family. Scott, the youngest son, was a different kind of enigma. A veteran who had served in Iraq, Scott returned home struggling to find steady work and lived in a loft above the family barn. He was strong, capable, and accustomed to physical labor, traits that investigators couldn't ignore when considering the logistics of moving Gary's 300-pound body to the burn pile. But Scott's own words cast him in an even darker light. On the day Gary's remains were found, he had been the one to identify them, declaring with certainty, "This is human." It was a statement that struck some as oddly detached. Yet suspicion didn't stop with the sons. Melody Farris, Gary's wife of over 30 years, was quickly emerging as a central figure in the investigation. Her behavior before and after Gary's death painted a troubling picture. She had insisted on locating life insurance paperwork almost immediately after his disappearance, a move that prosecutors would later argue demonstrated a financial motive. And then there was Rusty Barton, the man who had entered Melody's life during her marriage to Gary. What began as an arrangement to care for a relative had blossomed into a full-blown affair, one that Melody didn't bother to hide. Rusty's involvement added a layer of intrigue, especially when it was revealed that he had been in regular contact with Melody in the hours following Gary's death. But perhaps the most damning detail was Gary's own words, spoken months before his death. He had confided in his children that he believed Melody was trying to poison him. One incident, involving cookies she had baked for him, had left him hospitalized. To Gary, it wasn't just an accident. It was an ominous sign that his life was in danger. As these revelations came to light, the Farris family's seemingly ordinary dysfunction transformed into a story of betrayal, greed, and desperation. Each new piece of information cast doubt on someone else, and the question loomed large. Was Gary's death the result of a carefully plotted scheme, or had years of tension and resentment finally boiled over into tragedy? The trial of Melody Farris was not just a courtroom proceeding, it was a public unraveling of a family already fractured beyond repair. For weeks, the Farris name filled headlines as prosecutors laid out their case against the woman they believed was responsible for her husband's gruesome death. But as the trial progressed, it became clear that this was no straightforward case of guilt or innocence. It was and secrets that had defined the Farris family for years. In a dramatic turn, all 4 of Gary and Melody's children took the stand. Their testimonies revealed a family divided not only by grief, but by loyalty. Christopher, Emily, and Scott spoke for the prosecution, painting their mother as a cold, calculating woman who had grown tired of her marriage and wanted Gary out of the picture. Christopher recounted the years of tension between his parents and shared text messages that revealed Gary's growing mistrust. Scott, the youngest, testified to his mother's volatile temper and shared a chilling moment when she smashed a plate against the wall, screaming, "I can't wait until the day he's gone." Rusty Barton, Melody's lover, provided what seemed to be the most damning evidence of all. In a recorded statement to police, Rusty claimed that Melody had called him on the night of Gary's murder and confessed, "He's in the burn pile." But Rusty later recanted this bombshell admission, telling the court that he had been coerced by law enforcement into making the statement. His sudden reversal cast doubt on his credibility, but the damage to Melody's defense had already been done. The prosecution presented a clear motive. Melody stood to gain financially from Gary's death. Despite years of earning millions as a corporate lawyer, Gary's wealth had been dwindling, and the family relied heavily on life insurance policies. Prosecutors argued that Melody had grown resentful of her husband's control over the finances and saw his death as a way out. They pointed to her behavior immediately after his disappearance, her insistence on securing the life insurance paperwork, her suspicious shopping trip for cleaning supplies, and her ongoing affair as evidence of premeditation. But Melody's defense team wasn't without its counter-arguments. They pointed to the glaring lack of physical evidence tying her directly to the murder. The blood droplets found in the basement were minimal and didn't align with the kind of violent altercation the prosecution described. There were no clear signs of a struggle, no witnesses, and no weapon definitively linked to the crime. The defense also raised questions about the possibility of someone else in the family committing the murder, pointing out that Scott, with his military background and access to the property, was just as capable of carrying out such an act. The courtroom became a battleground of conflicting stories and fractured relationships. For every piece of evidence the prosecution presented, the defense found a way to cast doubt. And as the trial wore on, it became clear that the truth wasn't just elusive. It might never be fully known. As the trial drew to a close, the jury was left with more questions than answers. Was Melody a cunning manipulator who had orchestrated her husband's death for financial gain? Or was she the scapegoat in a family where almost everyone had a motive? The answers would soon be decided, but the cracks in the Farris family's foundation had already been laid bare for all to see. After 6 long years of investigations, accusations, and emotional courtroom battles, the jury finally delivered its verdict. Melody Farris, the woman at the center of this tragic saga, was found guilty of her husband Gary's murder. For some, it was the closure they had been waiting for, a resolution to a crime that had torn a family apart. But for others, it was a decision that raised more questions than it answered. The courtroom was a mix of raw emotion and quiet disbelief as the sentence was read. Melody stood, stoic, her face betraying little of what she was feeling. Her children, once divided by the trial, now seemed united in their sorrow, though not necessarily in agreement. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, eager to capture the aftermath of a trial that had captivated the public for years. The implications of the verdict rippled far beyond the Farris family. For prosecutors, it was a hard-won victory, proof that justice could prevail even in the most complex of cases. But for the defense, it was a bitter end, one they argued was built on circumstantial evidence and conjecture. Without clear forensic proof or eyewitnesses, doubts lingered. Did the jury convict the right person? Many couldn't ignore the unanswered questions. The blood evidence in the basement was minimal, too minimal, some argued, to support the prosecution's theory of a violent crime. The burn pile, while shocking, offered no direct link to Melody. And Rusty Barton's recanted statement remained a dark cloud over the case. If he was telling the truth, why had he changed his story? If he lied, how much weight should the court have given to his initial claim? Even the Farris estate, once a symbol of success and unity, now stood as a haunting reminder of the family's fall. The once manicured pastures had grown wild, the barn stood silent, and the house sat empty, a shell of the life it once contained. It was as if the land itself had absorbed the weight of the tragedy, standing in stark contrast to the lives that had unraveled. For those who followed the case, the verdict provided an uneasy resolution. Melody Farris would spend her days behind bars, but the lingering doubts cast a shadow over the justice system. Was she truly the mastermind behind Gary's murder, or had she been convicted based on perception and circumstantial evidence? And if she wasn't guilty, then who was? In the end, the Farris family's story is one of destruction, not just of a life, but of a legacy. What began as a search for answers ended in division, with each family member carrying their own version of the truth. The case of Gary Farris may be closed, but the questions it raised will continue to haunt those who lived it and those who watched it unfold. The Farris family's tragedy leaves us with more questions than answers. Was Gary Farris's death the result of a meticulously planned murder, rooted in resentment and greed? Or was it an act of desperation, a moment of passion and rage that spiraled beyond control? Perhaps the most haunting possibility is that the truth, like Gary's remains, has been reduced to ashes. Impossible to piece back together. With every conflicting testimony, every shred of missing evidence, and every unanswered question, the story of Gary Farris doesn't end with certainty. Instead, it leaves behind a legacy of doubt. For the Farris family, the search for justice has only deepened the fractures that already existed. For their community, the echoes of this crime remain a chilling reminder of how thin the line can be between love and destruction. And for those of us watching from the outside, one question lingers. Will the real truth of what happened to Gary Farris ever come to light? Thank you for watching True Crime Theater HQ. If you're drawn to stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss an episode.